What's the status, Rex?
Quiet for now, sir. They're gearing up for another assault. Who's the youngling?
I'm Master Skywalker's Padawan. The name's Ahsoka Tano.
So I thought you said you'd never have a Padawan.
There's been a mix-up. The youngling isn't with me.
Stop calling me that! You're stuck with me, Sky Guy.
What did you just call me? Don't get snippy with me, little one. You know, I don't even think you're old enough to be a Padawan.
Well, maybe I'm not. But Master Yoda thinks I am.
Well, you're not with Master Yoda now. So if you're ready, you better start proving it. Captain Rex will show you how a little respect can go a long way.
Greetings, Bucketheads. Mayvar Tigar. Welcome to the 25th Ahsoka-packed episode of Mandovision. Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. Happy New Year. Welcome. This is the first episode of 2021, and it feels just like 2020 did. Wow, wow, wow. All right, remember the best way to reach out to this program is via social media. We are at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. Please be sure to like, subscribe, share the show with all the other Mandalorians in your covert, if possible or so inclined. Please give us those 5-star reviews if you're following along on Apple Podcasts. They go a really long way to getting the word out about what we do over here on Mandovision and our deep, profound love and respect for Star Wars and all that it encompasses. Also, please check out our network website, 3bzine.com, where you will find all the shows of the 3bzine network of podcasts, such as Beer Night in San Diego, the Tomcast Popcast, a pop culture podcast, and this fine show, Mandovision, focused on the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Star Wars galaxy. Hey, it's time to strap on your buckets because we're kicking off 2021 by going back in time. So I'll say it again. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Don't worry, Anakin. Just teach her everything I taught you and she'll turn out fine.
You know, something makes me think this was your idea from the start.
Let's just hope Anakin is ready for this responsibility.
Ready he is to teach an apprentice, to let go of his pupil. A greater challenge it will be. Master this Skywalker mess.
All right, so as I teased on the concluding episode for 2020, on our last Bantha Tracks episode that we did, episode 24, obviously, I alluded to the fact that we were going to go back in time. We were going to revisit Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the animated series that introduced so many of the wonderful elements that are now a big part of The Mandalorian on Disney+. And it should be a really, really interesting look back. I've revisited The Clone Wars several times over the years, over the intervening years. Never a straight run through like we're gonna do here. I usually just pick and choose like my favorite episodes and go back and watch those. But we're gonna go, like I said, we're gonna go back from the start with Star Wars: The Clone Wars from the movie all the way up to the final episodes that just aired this past year on Disney+. And then hopefully we'll also transition into Star Wars Rebels as well. And maybe by then we'll get to, at some point, Mandalorian, not The Mandalorian, Boba Fett, the Book of Boba Fett will be on. Whether we get all of our shows done before that, I don't know. But, hey, we need Star Wars content to talk about all year long. So, hey, we'll just see how it goes. But don't worry, we're never going to stop this. We're going to keep going with this because, again, there's so many vital elements that play into The Mandalorian that come from this series. And not just for The Mandalorian's sake, but I mean for the Star Wars mythology overall. The Clone Wars is a wonderful animated series that does so much to enrich, a very important period of the Skywalker mythology, particularly with Anakin's, obviously. Because this movie, not just the movie, but the entire series does so much to make Anakin's character far more interesting than what we got to see in the movies. So let's kind of go back in time a little bit to the time of the prequels. I was in my 20s, so I was happy to stand in line and wait for the movie to come out. Midnight screenings back at the Regal Cinemas in Rockville, Maryland, for many of these. Actually, I think all three. I think I might have seen Revenge of the Sith out here in California. I can't quite remember the timeline. But regardless, the prequels were, I think for the most part they were not exactly what a lot of old time fans, the long time fans, had expected. But an entire new generation grew up with those movies, and there is a good story within the prequel series between episodes 1, 2, and 3. If you want to get critical of the prequel films, sure, you can do that. You can kind of knock some of the dialogue, some of the scripting. There's some pacing issues, some acting. There's a whole thing. You can do the whole thing, and I admit that as a staunch defender of the prequel series because there is a great story in there. It just kind of gets muddied and lost, and I don't like to do that thing where someone goes on a podcast and says, well, this is what they should have done. But I'm not going to do that, is what I'm saying. But it's very easy to look at some of the things they could have done differently. And I think one of the things that would have been nice to explore more fully was this period of the Clone Wars in one of the films. Because, think back to episode 4 when we first saw episode 4 and, Obi-Wan is telling Luke about his father, how he's the best star pilot in the galaxy and a cunning warrior and his best friend. And, we only get glimpses of that in the prequel series. And I think that's probably the biggest, or the most unfortunate part of the prequels. You get Anakin's introduction / origin in episode 1 where he's a little kid. Then we go to the beginning of the Clone Wars with episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And then in episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, we're at the end of the Clone Wars. Now, it's very likely, very possible, I think he's even said it in the past, like Lucas kind of had designs on doing this series this way to tell more of Anakin's story. But they also learned a lot at the same time from the prequels and their attempt to make new characters that longtime fans butted up against. And again, the prequels at the time of release were much maligned. I think people have I think a lot of people have come around on them, especially as the younger generation who grew up with them and embraced them when they were kids have brought that joy with them into their adulthood and have kind of helped convince people that these are much better than you think they are. You're just putting your old man business, your old person business on here. So it's not fair, and I think the biggest representation of that in the new characters who just became targeted by longtime fans like Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar just took the brunt of everyone's anger over the prequels. He was like the easy target, I suppose, because you weren't gonna take shots at Obi-Wan. You weren't gonna do that. But regardless, the Clone Wars animated series came to be because there's this huge period of Star Wars mythology that wasn't being depicted in a film, and so this series came to life as a way to explore more of the things that we didn't get to see from the movies. I also want to take a minute real quick before we get into Star Wars The Clone Wars, the animated film that kicked off the series. I do want to put a shout out there to the first Clone Wars animated series, the one written and drawn by Gennady Tartakovsky. I think I said that correctly. The creator of Samurai Jack, who did a wonderful series of I think they consider it a micro series that depicted battles of the Clone Wars in a very much more traditional 2D animation style. And I don't know if those are available to watch on Disney Plus or anything like that. But if you get a chance to find them, I think at the very least you can watch them on YouTube, or at least clips of them on YouTube. Really fun show to watch and check out. Not as important to the mythology as this series from Dave Filoni and George Lucas would be, but again, an interesting part of Star Wars canon, Star Wars mythology, and it's just kind of fun. Gennady does a really good job of having Jedi just being total kick-ass super warrior dudes. It's pretty fun. It's a pretty fun series, so check it out if you have not checked it out in the past. All right, so let's get back into sort of what kicked off Star Wars: The Clone Wars was this movie. Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the movie. It's basically 4 episodes linked together. We get, as you open the movie, you don't get the traditional scroll or anything like that. You get sort of like an opening newsreel sort of setup, which kind of becomes one of the signatures of the show from episode to episode, kind of like catching you up on the events of the war and why and where we find our characters before the episode begins in full. What we don't get in this movie that became a staple of the show is sort of like what are considered to be like the Jedi fortune cookies, where they dispense like these words of wisdom that thematically link with the episode. That does not come out in this movie. So two elements of Star Wars, the Clone Wars, and what it brings to the canon, I suppose. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say on that. Again, I like that newsreel footage thing. I think it's really cool. But I did kind of miss, when I revisited this, I did sort of miss those Jedi little fortune cookies that you get at the beginning of each episode. I should actually pause before I get too deep onto this sort of recapping of the movie, because this is going to be a very different recap than I would normally do, like I've done for the Mandalorian episodes, because I don't know if I have a whole heck of a lot to say here on this movie as far as like a deep revelatory information. But definitely, I mean, listen, there's stuff to talk about. Don't get me wrong, but there's not a ton of ooh, that thing back there, that's a reference to so and so. There's not a lot of Easter eggy sort of stuff going on here. It's pretty straightforward. We'll talk a little bit more about the plot in a minute, but I did want to kind of put a pin in something real quick, because as I was prepping for this episode, as I was doing my research and rewatching the movie and going through some information on the internet, two things popped out to me that I would love help from this wonderful audience. If you know who I should trust. So I pulled up Star Wars: The Clone Wars on Disney Plus to watch it. It lists the movie as a 2007 release. Now, when I looked at the information on IMDb, it lists it as a 2008. I believe it even tags it as coming out like something like August 8th or August 15th, 2008. This is an interesting dilemma, because depending on which year is correct, and I tend to trust the IMDb database because, it says, August 15th, 2008. This changes my recollection of seeing this in theaters quite dramatically, because I believe in 2007 and in 2008, I was in two different places. And so my memory of seeing this, I remember seeing this in theaters, I should say, but my recollection of who I saw it with and in what theater and in what state I was in is a complete blur. So if my brother's out there, let me know if we watched this together. My recollection is that I watched this with my brother, but I also am recollecting that we watched this in Simi Valley, which I don't think is possible because none of us lived in Simi Valley in 2008. So what does that mean? I don't know. Is it possible I saw this on the East Coast? Entirely possible I saw this on the East Coast. So, perhaps I have some form of long-term hibernation sickness. I guess that's entirely possible. I just don't know. Anyways, that's a nice little tidbit for y'all about my viewing experience watching the Clone Wars. But I remember coming out of that theater and with a very mixed reaction to it, and I don't think I'm going to be making a shocking statement here, because I think a lot of my reaction was what a lot of fans in my age bracket felt. We all liked the depictions of Anakin and Obi-Wan and Yoda and the clone troopers. We did not care for Ahsoka Tano, which seemed to be the opposite of what they were going for. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Before we do that, though, I do want to give love to the cast, to the credits. All right. So remember, Star Wars: The Clone Wars, directed by Dave Filoni, who is now the beloved Dave Filoni. This is written by Henry Gilroy. Stephen Melching, and Scott Murphy are the credited screenwriters. It runs at 1 hour and 38 minutes. Again, you can watch this on Disney Plus. I believe it's also available on Amazon at the moment, though that might just be for purchase. Not entirely sure. Your voice cast: as Anakin Skywalker, Matt Lanter; as Ahsoka Tano, Ashley Eckstein, as Obi-Wan Kenobi, you have James Arnold Taylor; D. Bradley Baker is the voice of the clone troopers and Captain Rex and Captain Cody and every other clone. Tom Kane steps in as Yoda and Admiral Yularen. Nika Futterman is Asajj Ventress. Ian Abercrombie, Mr. Pitt himself, is Chancellor Palpatine / Darth Sidious. You have Corey Burton as Zero the Hutt, Catherine Tabor as Padme Amidala. Matthew Wood does the voice of the battle droids. Matthew Wood, who we just saw returning to the role of Bib Fortuna in that stinger at the end of this past season of The Mandalorian. Interesting. You have Kevin Michael Richardson as Jabba the Hutt, David Accord as Rota the Huttlet, Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu, Anthony Daniels reprises C-3PO, and Christopher Lee returns to do the voice of Count Dooku. So you get a little bit of a mix of that prequel cast with a new cast who is going to move forward and be the sort of the main cast of the animated series. Now, Mace. Samuel L. Jackson does not stick around to voice Mace for the remainder of the series. I don't remember exactly when he left or if he just did the movie. So that'll be something we talk about on the next episode that features Mace Windu, at least. Maybe not the next episode, but you know what I mean. So this is an interesting movie. Let's kind of get into the movie now. Let's get into it proper. I've been jumping around. I apologize. My notes are a mess. My brain is askew. Oh boy. Like I said, I sort of had a hard time deciding what the format was going to be for this particular episode because I didn't know if I had a lot. I have a lot to say about this movie, but I wasn't sure the best way to present what I wanted to discuss because, again, when I watched this movie the first time, I distinctly remember not being wowed by it. But on subsequent reviewings, particularly since Rebels had come out, when I would go back and watch this movie again, it was a very different experience because I knew where the show was going. I knew where the characters were going. And so I actually have a much better time watching this movie now than when it first came out, which I think is a testament to the character arcs and the character development that happened in this movie. But particularly, over the course of this series, not in the movie. I remember I came out of the movie theater not a fan of Ahsoka Tano, and I was not alone. And it sort of seems like that was an intentional thing. Dave Filoni has talked about how, one of the lessons they learned from the prequels. Now, remember, Dave Filoni was not involved in the prequels. But one of the lessons Lucas learned was that trying to create characters for fans to like doesn't always go the way you want it to go. And I think I once again refer to Jar Jar Binks. And so they wanted to sort of be able to control the narrative. And according to Dave Filoni, they knew that the audience was going to have a negative reaction to Ahsoka Tano because of her sort of arrogance, her flippancy, her sort of cavalier attitude, her sort of casual disrespect to Anakin. We heard it in that one clip calling him Sky Guy. I hated the Sky Guy thing. I cannot lie. I hated the Sky Guy thing. The Sky Guy and Snips thing, I did not like that. It did not work for me. Sorry. I'm sorry. And it's one of the things that still kind of bugs me, even going back. Even now that I'm fully immersed in love for Ahsoka Tano, I still go back and I hate the Sky Guy thing more than anything. It's not good. But going back to the intentions here, Filoni and Lucas, they played a game with the audience, knowing that we would have strong feelings in the negative light of Ahsoka Tano, but also knowing what was coming ahead for her. Character development is what changes that character. It wasn't some sort of sudden reversal where we all of a sudden one act changes our opinions of Ahsoka and redeems her in all of our eyes. No. It's a very gradual thing, and that's going to be part of the fun of going back over Star Wars: The Clone Wars is going to be pinpointing those sort of key moments in Ahsoka's development as a Padawan, as a Jedi. What turns her into the fan favorite character that she is now, because it didn't start that way. And perhaps if there's anyone in the listening audience who is younger than me, which is not hard because I'm very, very old, perhaps you felt differently with Ahsoka when you first saw her in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, if this was sort of your first experience and you kind of grew up with Ahsoka and you kind of went on the journey with her. Maybe you were with her from the beginning, but for fans of my age group, we sort of had to be, I don't want to say convinced, but we sort of had to see the development. We had to see the character grow and change and become this wonderful, wonderful character who now is beloved by the fans of every generation, by fans of every age group. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this movie, and the biggest thing I can say about, going back to watch it again, is I know the end game now for well, not Ahsoka's end game necessarily, but the growth of that character and her development, and it's so vital, and going back and seeing where that starts, and realizing that Ahsoka has a similar path to Anakin in a lot of senses, this sort of overconfidence, this high opinion of herself, of her abilities, of thinking that because she can wield the Force, she can control it and do the impossible. And we see in later episodes of this show, and we will get to them, how that doesn't always work in her favor, and how she has to learn lessons the hard way. And that's a key thing, because one of the things that a fan at the time could have criticized about these early episodes and in this movie is like, Ahsoka doesn't learn any lessons. She doesn't have any consequences for her actions. It seems like she kind of gets off the hook in the beginning. But there are key development points for Ahsoka that we will get into, and there's going to be so much fun to talk about. And I think that's what I like about going back and rewatching this movie is like, wow, Ahsoka is so different from the Ahsoka that we know from later in the Clone Wars, from the Ahsoka that we meet in Star Wars Rebels, to the Ahsoka that we finally see again in live action on The Mandalorian this past season. So really wonderful stuff. A really wonderful character to grow with and see that development. It just, I've been saying it for a long time. The Clone Wars is character development at its finest, and this was a show that, because I think people had a negative reaction to this initial Clone Wars movie, they overlooked the series when it came on Cartoon Network, later in 2008. They were like, well, I didn't like that movie, I didn't like that Ahsoka Tano, and I'm not going to watch a show with that character because, X reason, Y reason, whatever. And so it took a little time for that show to get traction, I think. It had loyalists like me who were going to watch it no matter what our feelings were. And we were just going to, I can't speak for all of fandom. I remember my perspective was like, well, I'm going to watch this because it's Star Wars, and I like what they did with so many of the other characters. I like this heroic version of Anakin. I like this version of Obi-Wan. I mean, I loved Obi-Wan, so it didn't really matter. I'm an Obi-Wan fanatic, so I was in from the get-go. But I liked what they were doing with the clones. I wanted to see more of the clone stuff. And aside from Ahsoka, the clone-focused episodes of this series are some of my favorites as well. So it's again, I'm saying it a lot. It's going to be fun to revisit these kind of pivotal episodes in all of these characters, Captain Rex and Ahsoka, and there's great stuff with Obi-Wan and huge stuff with Anakin. It's going to be a lot of fun to explore, and we're going to talk about how this show sort of does what they couldn't really do as clearly in the prequel films as we would have liked them to, which was sort of illustrate the cleverness, the sort of deceptive trap that Darth Sidious lured the Jedi into. And again, I've mentioned it on prior episodes of The Mandalorian and on the Tomcast podcast. The brilliance of Sidious's plan in basically tricking the Jedi into using a slave army. Come on. The Jedi, only a handful of Jedi ever see it. And it's just, again, we'll talk about those episodes. When we get into the clone focus episodes, we'll talk more about Sidious's plans and sort of his way of obscuring the Jedi from seeing correctly with the light side of the Force. It's Sidious has a more intricate plan than he gets credit for, but because people know episodes 2 and 3, I guess 1, 2, and 3 if you want to count them all, they don't see the sort of subtle brilliance of the prequels, and I've maintained this for years, and I'm glad that you can now watch that clip on YouTube of Dave Filoni where he's explaining all this stuff that I've been saying, but no one wants to listen to me and I don't want to. I'm not claiming that I'm smart. Other people know this too. if you really want to get I don't want to say it's like redemptive for the prequels, but the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, very. It explains in detail exactly what Sidious has done and how it affects the Force and how it affects the Jedi and why it was so cunning and brilliant and how they never saw it coming. And we see that played out in this show. It's wonderful. But let's talk about the movie. I've been talking about so much other stuff but the movie. So we have to talk about the beginning of this flick, right? We have to talk about, it starts off simple enough. Rota the Huttling, Jabba the Hutt's son, has been kidnapped. He calls to the Republic for aid in finding him. He wants the Jedi to find his little pumpkin muffin. And that is the impetus for our adventure. The Jedi are reluctant to help Jabba because he's a gangster. But the Republic wants to make this deal with Jabba so that they can get access to the hyperlanes that go out to the Outer Rim, which is where much of the intense battles of the Clone Wars are being fought, on the outer rim of the galaxy, where many of the Separatist forces are. A bunch of the Republic is consolidated in the center of the galaxy. It's those Outer Rim territories that want to break away and become their own separate entity from the Republic. So it's at this point I want to ask a little question of all you wonderful, kind people that are listening to the show. What was your first reaction to the animation in the film? I mean, it was the first attempt to do Star Wars in a sort of 3D computer animated sort of animation. How did you feel about that the first time you saw it? I know for me it was a little, I don't know if jarring is the right word, but it did take a little getting used to. And I think they sort of refined that animation over time and as the series went on. Going back and watching the Clone Wars movie, you can see it's not quite as smooth, not quite as well-rounded. I think there's a couple shading issues as well with some of the characters. But they seem to put a little bit more polish on it moving forward. They kind of tweak it as they go. And it's not big, huge, sweeping changes. It's all very subtle. But I think when you see the animation in later seasons compared to the movie, you do see a sort of a development, a sort of improvement. Like I said, a little polish on that animation. I remember reading some movie reviews when it first came out too, and a lot of critics were very harsh on the animation. And I don't know, I think there was sort of a Star Wars fatigue at that point. People, it wasn't that long before the prequels had wrapped up. Revenge of the Sith came out in like 2003. So I guess there was a little bit of a gap in time, but I think people still kind of felt burned by the prequels in a lot of senses. Especially the older generations who weren't as crazy about it. And you can't deny that the prequels are very reliant on computer graphics, computer technology, as opposed to the practical effects that were so wonderful and so endearing in that first series. So I think some critics looked on this movie a little bit more harshly than they should have because of things like that. I have no proof of that, but that's just a theory that I'm working under. Let me know what you think. So we're not going to do a beat by beat sort of situation, right? So we're not going to go beat by beat here and break down every little single element of the story here. We meet it with Obi-Wan and Anakin on Christophsis. They're fighting the droid army. I think the battle scenes are really cool. I think they're really good looking. Again, you get to see some of the personality of the clones to a certain extent, not to the depth that you will later on in the show, but it kind of offers you a good entry point for D. Bradley Baker's Captain Rex and Commander Cody and the rest of the clones, and sort of how they will all be a little different. We even catch up with Oddball, who I believe makes an appearance in Revenge of the Sith too, in that opening sequence. So a lot of good stuff there. We are introduced to Asajj Ventress, Count Dooku, Darth Sidious. We get all of our dark side of the Force representatives. I don't know. There are some really good Ventress episodes down the road, so I don't want to talk too much about her necessarily, because I think we're going to have a really good chance to to kind of dive into Ventress and her role and everything, where she comes from, who she is, her desire to be a Sith, but is rebuffed by the rule of two, so she can only be Dooku's lackey, for lack of a better word. Again, some good stuff with Ventress coming up. We'll talk more about her. There's some stuff I gotta double check some of the mythology, because there was some really great stuff with Ventress and Obi-Wan in the Star Wars Clone Wars comic book series that Dark Horse was putting out at the time. But I don't recall if they have allowed that to stay part of continuity, or if they push that out. So I got to kind of double check some stuff on that. But again, that'll be stuff for later episodes when we get to talk more about Ventress. But I think Ventress is a fun character. They connect her back to some old mythology, and again, like we've talked about in The Mandalorian, Clone Wars was one of the first things to bring in old canon, old mythology that was kind of thrown out at a certain point. Now, no, hold on. I know what you're gonna say. I know what you're gonna say. But Tom, Disney hadn't bought Lucasfilm and Star Wars yet, and you're absolutely right. So that mythology was still exist. It still existed. It was still technically in play. But Dave Filoni and George Lucas and the team, the creative people behind this show, didn't have to bring in Dathomir if they didn't like elements of it, and they wanted to explore that more fully. So Filoni and I think I want to give all credit to Filoni and maybe some of the other writers, for taking that old expanded universe canon and finding pieces of it that they wanted to use in their show, no matter what, and using it to enrich their show and enrich their characters. So a wonderful thing there. Again, we're jumping ahead because we're talking about Dathomir and Ventress more. We'll get there. But I wanted to bring up Ventress because I love. She has a fun dynamic with both Anakin and Obi-Wan. There's great lightsaber fights between the two of them, between Anakin, between Obi-Wan and Ventress. A lot of really fun stuff. I sort of jumped ahead again too, because we didn't talk about the initial encounter with Ahsoka when she arrives after that initial battle at Christophsis. When she exits the carrier craft, and Obi-Wan is at least pretending that he's the one getting a new apprentice, and then she delivers the news that Master Yoda wanted her to be Anakin's Padawan, and the sort of surprise that goes through. It's interesting because, yes, that's definitely how it kind of felt when we last saw Anakin in Attack of the Clones. Like, he didn't seem the sort of Jedi who was going to be a teacher. So this was sort of an interesting dynamic role shift for him, and it was something that kind of came out of left field. And I know one of the big criticisms, one of the big concerns with this was going to be, well, what the hell happens to this character? She clearly dies because we don't see her in Attack of the Clones. Again, if you're listening to this podcast, you ultimately know the final fate. Well, not the final fate, but you know Ahsoka's fate as far as that goes. Why she's not talked about or referenced or featured in Attack of the Clones. And it's almost like they had a plan from the beginning, and we just didn't see it because we were so impatient. It's really silly. That was the big hang up that people, one of the big hang ups that people have with that character is like, well, clearly she's gonna die. And it's like, no, that doesn't mean anything. Come on, there's a lot that can happen in the Star Wars galaxy. It's a wild, raucous place, and people make decisions. Not always good ones, not always bad ones. But it's Star Wars, mostly bad decisions. Let's be honest. So yes, we are introduced to Ahsoka. She's sort of brash and precocious, a little overconfident, maybe a touch of arrogance about her, but not in a bad way. She never comes across as she never comes across as a bad character with bad intentions or anything like that. The likability factor may be a little low because she's a little intense, a little in your face, a little over the top, but that's to be expected, right? So again, I am a little curious what everyone's first reactions to the introduction of Ahsoka were. I suspect it's a fairly generational thing. Older fans like myself brushed up against her sort of disrespect for particularly for Anakin, but she sort of is disrespectful to other characters, and we'll talk about that more because there's other episodes where that comes through more. And again, we talked about it. It seems to be by design. I think oh god, I don't even remember if I finished my point on that. It seemed to be by design that Filoni did this. They wanted to be able to control the narrative of Ahsoka Tano, and they were aware that the fans weren't going to like her at first, and they very specifically had it charted out how this character was going to grow and develop and become a character that the fans would like. And it seemed like they knew all the steps that were necessary, and they seemed very aware of what had to be done to make it happen, and they pulled it off masterfully. And again, we will talk about that more in detail as we get to those key linchpin episodes for Ahsoka's character and the way she grows and changes, and again goes from a character who not a lot of people liked at the beginning to that fan favorite character. But yes, we're introduced to her fairly quickly. She quickly joins Anakin. They sort of have a competitive rivalry throughout this movie, but they butt heads a lot at the same time, and it's a lot of it's because they are very similar in many ways. But Anakin is the older and wiser Jedi, and her sort of overconfidence leads to many of their clashes of character and of personality. But again, we grow. We're focused about this movie, so it's a little rough for me. Again, I say this going back and watching this now, it's not as bad as it was the first time. I don't bump up against it, but that's because I know what's coming. So anyone in the audience listening who's younger than me, and maybe you were 10, 12, younger, and you first saw Ahsoka, were you in from the get-go? Were you along for the ride? I am curious about that. I don't know enough younger Star Wars fans. I work with a lot of younger people, but they are not Star Wars fans. So it's kind of hard to have a conversation about, hey, how did you feel about Ahsoka Tano when you were 12? I haven't gotten to that point with some of my coworkers. And again, many of them not Star Wars fans at all. They are way too cool for Star Wars, I guess. Though I think that makes them nerds because they don't like Star Wars. So I guess, as Obi-Wan says, it's all about a certain point of view, right? Anyways, listen, let's break this movie down as far as the plot. Listen, we don't need to go, again, we're not going to go beat by beat here because the movie's straightforward enough. Jabba's kid's been captured. They have to rescue the kid. Count Dooku and Sidious, they have a plot to frame the Jedi for the whole thing. And so I want to talk about this plot here because I tried to break this down in as simple terms as I could for this movie. And listen, it's Star Wars. I've read enough of the novels. I've read enough of the comic books, and by enough I mean basically all of, to know that the bad guys often have crazy, convoluted plans, and this is no different. So I tried to boil it down into just a couple lines here on my notepad. So let me read this to you. All right, Zero aids Dooku to kidnap Rota so that Jabba will call the Republic / Jedi to aid him, while Dooku attempts to frame the Jedi for killing Rota so that the Jedi will then come for Jabba, and Zero becomes the leader of the Hutt clans and a puppet for Count Dooku. That's pretty much the boiled down version of this plot. Now, I get it. Count Dooku wants a puppet Hutt leader, so he kind of has sway over the crime lords in the galaxy. He controls those hyperlanes that go out to the Outer Rim. But let me know, am I oversimplifying this when I say, couldn't Count Dooku have just taken a bucket, like a dump truck full of Republic credits, and dropped it off at Jabba's place and be like, hey, we're going to use those hyperspace lanes. Are you cool with that? Here's some cash. I sort of feel like Jabba would have been amenable to that. He is a gangster. They do like money. Maybe he at some point, maybe Dooku foresaw that Jabba would eventually try to play the Republic against him and get more money out of him, and he just decided, you know what, I'm going to put my own Hutt in control of the Hutt clans, and we'll go from there. It's a complicated plot, and it relies on a lot of factors that seem to be beyond Dooku's control, but he is Count Dooku. He is extremely overconfident in the abilities of himself and Ventress and a bunch of droids who are not very good tacticians. So, yeah, I guess if you want to criticize the movie in a negative light, aside from, Ahsoka being somewhat abrasive in her opening appearance, you could go after the plot pretty easily. I think it's held together by some really nice action pieces, some really fun lightsaber stuff, good piloting scenes. You get Tatooine, you get the desert, you get those what are they? Those, I want to say lava droids, but I don't think that's right. It's those bodyguards that Grievous has, and we haven't even talked about Grievous, General Grievous, one of the. Listen, I'm not going to be kind to General Grievous. I think General Grievous is a turd of a character. But we'll talk more about that. He doesn't even make an appearance in this movie, but I do believe he is in the first episode of the actual series. So we will get time to explore General Grievous and all the not great things about General Grievous and why he is, in my opinion, not a great Star Wars character. As opposed to the characters that we get introduced to. But again, Ahsoka, not great at first. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this movie is and again I am fortunate to have perspective because I know where Ahsoka gets to. So going back and watching this has been fun. And so if anyone out there hasn't gone back to watch Star Wars: The Clone Wars, maybe now's a good time. If you've watched through Clone Wars, if you've watched through Rebels, and if you've watched through The Mandalorian, which I'm assuming you all have because we're all here for the same reason, right? Pop on the Clone Wars and see what you think. Especially if you were sort of shook by your introduction to the character and whatever feelings you had at first, especially if they were negative feelings, are they still as strong as they were when you watched it the first time, or do those strong negative feelings lessen because you know the journey that character is about to go on, and the changes and the difficulties she will have to overcome in her quest to become a Jedi. I think that's the most interesting part of this movie when you go back and watch it again, is sort of seeing how it's going to be constructed. These are the first steps of a Jedi's of a hero's journey, basically. I mean, this is Joe Campbell stuff right here. I mean, the hero's quest kind of begins here, and each of these characters has their own quest and their own arcs. It just happens that Ahsoka's it starts off in a position of she has to work her way into our hearts, sort of thing. She's not endearing off the bat the way that many characters on the hero's journey are. That likability is not as strong because she's so abrasive to the established characters, and I think that's the hard part that people needed to wrap their heads around. Well, not that they needed to wrap their heads around, but that's how Filoni and Lucas and the writers decided to make the fans like her. That they were gonna do this on purpose. They were gonna bounce her off of those characters in a way that was unexpected and unlikable to a lot of people. And I think it worked masterfully. I remember my feelings after seeing this movie, and I was like, I don't know about this Ahsoka characters, this whole Padawan thing. It sounds like a disaster, but I'm gonna watch it. And I was so glad I did. And I spent many a year convincing Star Wars fans that if they weren't watching the Clone Wars, they had to go back. And remember, for a long time, it was available on Netflix to watch. And I think it got a lot of legs on Netflix, For a long time, you remember, Netflix was one of the only streaming services available. And so people had Netflix, and they just watched the Clone Wars, especially once it started streaming. And you didn't have to send for discs anymore. Whew. So yeah, the journey of Ahsoka. And it's fun to go back and see it, these first steps, because again, not good. But knowing that Filoni and Lucas and the talented team of writers and people behind the scenes, that they had a plan. So wonderful, so refreshing. And I liked what they did with the other characters too. I'm a sucker for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Give me more Obi-Wan Kenobi stories. I'm in. I'm all in. I love that character. And I loved the getting to see this heroic Anakin, the sort of version that we were promised back in A New Hope when Obi-Wan told those stories to Luke, and now we finally get to see the promise of it. In the prequel films, we get an Anakin in emotional turmoil in most of these films. It's rare that he's just the great warrior, great pilot that we've seen. There's flashes of it, but in Episode 2 they kill his mom, so he's tempted to the dark side. In Episode 3, it's Sidious completing the seduction of Anakin to the dark side of the Force. This show shows us the great Jedi warrior that Anakin is, and why he is a wonderful character, and why his fall is so tragic. Maybe it's not as I think in the films it's a little too understated sometimes. The sort of corruption and the seduction of Anakin to the dark side of the Force. This show does a great job of showing him going those directions, the push and pull of the light and the dark on Anakin. And again, I can't wait to get into those episodes with you. But this is a strong start. This movie gives a strong start to Anakin's journey in a more noble, more heroic Anakin Skywalker. We also get Padme. Padme's always been a solid character, so her inclusion in the show is great. I love getting to see, obviously, R2-D2 is a big part of the show. C-3PO is a big part of the show. Great to have Anthony Daniels on board for the movie. I can't remember if he sticks around for the entire series or not. Or I will have to double check on some of those facts. I'm sure some of you guys and gals out there listening already know the answer to that. But don't worry, I'll present the information if you don't. So it's going to be a good time. So I think what I want to do, which is different than what I've done with the Mandalorian episodes, is I think I want to start giving that like a rating, right? Should we do like a rating system for the Clone Wars movie and then the various episodes of the show? And I mean, what do you think? Should we do it out of 10? I'm leaning towards doing it out of 10. And I think I want to... Now listen. It's so funny because, when I saw this movie, I think I would have given it like a 5, like a really solid 5. I think now, though, on subsequent reviewings, and again, finding Ahsoka's character to be less abrasive, because I know the journey she's about to go on, I think it's a 6, maybe a 6.5. What do y'all think of that? Would you be down with a 6.5 version, or do you think I'm crazy and I'm being way too harsh on certain elements of this movie? And I'm judging this. This isn't so much based as a reaction to Ahsoka, because again, like we said, I know her journey. I know where she's gonna go. So I'm basing this mostly on the plot. A couple of like semi-rough pieces of animation and some shading things. But I think a 6. And also, I think also partially, I may be also a little bit jaded too, because I know how great the show gets. There are episodes that are 10 out of 10s easily, and it'll be fun to discuss those. But moving forward, if you're gonna go on the journey with me and rewatch these as we're breaking them down, as we're having this conversation about them, season 1's rough. Season 1 is a bit of a drag. So it's gonna be a process, but we're in this together, and together we will get to the other side, and we'll make it to season 2, where things start picking up really nicely and getting really, really solid, really, really entertaining. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. So yeah, I think I'm gonna give Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the movie, a 6.5 out of 10. It has aged a little bit better than I thought it would, because I know too much. If it's your first time watching it, by all means, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your reactions. Tell me, let me know what you think. Am I crazy? Is it a 7? Is it an 8? Is it a 9? Is it a 10? Or do you still not like it? Is it a 1? Is it a 2? I'd love to hear you. You know where to find me, Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. Well, I think we did it. I think, again, we didn't do the blow-by-blows on here, and I guess the only other criticism I had, you know what, I will share 2 criticisms real quickly that I did write down, because there was a couple things that were weird. Okay, so in the section where Anakin and the Republic forces are held up at the monastery, and the droids are coming, and they're going to take the Huttlet back from Anakin, and the Republic forces lock themselves in the monastery, but then the droids cut the lock to get in. Why is the lock on the outside? It's a Star Wars lock, so it's one of those robotic tech thingies, right? So why do you lock a door from the outside? And that just seemed weird to me. And then I thought it seemed like, now perhaps there is an assertion to be made that Count Dooku was exerting some force pokes at Jabba the Hutt, but Jabba seems like really easy to manipulate in this episode. Like he goes from he just buys everything that Dooku is selling him. You know, he's like, oh, show me the evidence. And, you know, yes, Dooku produces some evidence, but it clearly could have been manufactured. You know, does Jabba the Hutt spend time to verify any of this stuff? No. It's just, oh, send these bounty hunters out to kill everyone, because clearly this guy has nothing to gain from showing me this information. So I thought it was a little interesting how Jabba was completely and totally manipulated by Count Dooku into doing exactly what he wanted him to do. Boo to that. I also would like to discuss, as we get out of here, let's talk about. Well, I mean, let's talk about Rota the Hutt. All right. First of all, this is Rota's only appearance in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. He's never to be seen again. He's briefly mentioned in a couple of episodes. Now, I'm curious as to why that is. I think there is something that says that Rota is 10 as this story takes place. And Hutts obviously have a longer lifespan, much in the way that the Baby Yoda situation is. So Rota's 10, even though he looks like a small baby. And apparently, according to the lore, many Huttlings spend the first 50 years. Was it 50 or 20? 50 or 20 or 50 with their Hutt mates in a brood patch is what I believe it was called. But Jabba wanted his son to see the galaxy and I guess, you know, show him the empire that he would one day inherit. So are we going to see Rota the Hutt in The Mandalorian? Is that a possibility? Will that be this character's big return? I have no idea. I just thought it was interesting that Rota never came to be anything else ever again through the history of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, through the history of Rebels. No mention ever again in anything, and I'm very curious about that. You know, you can't even find going on Wikipedia and looking up details. You know, it's still assumed he's out there. You know, there's no belief that he's been murdered or killed at any point. But perhaps we're looking at a future nemesis for Boba Fett in the Book of Boba Fett. I don't know. Wild speculation? Maybe. But wouldn't that be something if this Huttling that we are introduced to in Star Wars: The Clone Wars now becomes a major player against Boba Fett in the new Boba Fett series? So that's some fun speculation. And then another thing I wanted to talk about too was, again, 2008. If that's that is the year I choose to believe this came out, not 2007, like Disney Plus is saying. 2008 was a different world, for sure. You know, Star Wars was definitely a big deal, but you know, in the intervening 13 years, Star Wars has permeated the culture in an all new way, to all new heights. You know, the sale to Disney, the sequel trilogy. You know, Rogue One, Solo, a whole slew of new movies, live action movies. Obviously, The Mandalorian is a huge deal. You have the park rides at Disney World and Disneyland. So Star Wars is bigger than ever. So looking back at 2008, I had to be curious, and this might be a 2020, 2021 perspective. But in 2008, do you think they thought that like a baby Hutt was going to be like a super cute idea and would like capture the zeitgeist of popular culture the way that Baby Yoda has? Food for thought, right? Like, I mean, were they really thinking that Rota was gonna be like, oh man, we're gonna sell some serious toys off of this thing? Or was it just, was it what it was, a sort of disposable character that wouldn't be touched upon for the next, for the duration of the show? I'm very curious, but I couldn't help watching it and thinking, it's like, okay, Baby Hutt, Baby Yoda, who wins in the cute-off? And I think it's a landslide for young Grogu. But it is funny to watch that and sort of think about little Grogu in comparison to a little Huttling. Weird, wild stuff. You know what I mean? Well, listen. I think I've said everything I need to say about this show, and that's a good thing. Because we got a lot more to say, because we have so many more shows to watch. I mean, there's something like 133 episodes of the Clone Wars. So it's going to be really awesome to dive into all this stuff. It's gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna have a blast doing this. We got 7 seasons of this show to watch. We're gonna be back next week. We're gonna be talking about the episode entitled Ambush. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna go one at a time. So the episodes will be shorter in duration. I'm hoping to do 30-40 minute episodes. Again, I don't think we'll be doing commentary tracks or anything like that, and we may not necessarily be doing a blow by blow recapping of every episode, but we're going to talk about the key moments, the interesting parts of the episode, and then, assuming I remember, we're gonna rate them, and we're gonna kind of rank the seasons as we go. And again, like I said, season 1 is a bit of a rough watch, so I think we know where season 1's going to end up on the grand scheme of things, but it's going to be fun to go back and check it all out again. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for taking the time and listening to the show. I said it before at the end of the year. It's been so much fun to do MandoVision. I have a really great time. I think one day I'd like to have a guest come on with me. But I have so much fun doing this by myself and just chatting with other like-minded Star Wars fans. I mean, it's sort of the dream. This is what I used to do on Wednesday nights at the comic book store in Rockville, Maryland. You know, it was stay after hours after I'd purchased all my books and just talk with, pop culture fans. I mean, we were all Star Wars enthusiasts, talk about the latest Dark Horse comics that were coming out at the time, because that was the only source of Star Wars material we had. Just fun stuff like that. So I've had a blast doing the show. It seems like we're getting wonderful numbers of people listening to the show. I hope everyone is enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying making it, because it is my absolute pleasure to make the show. So I hope you're liking it. I know today's was a little weird. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't have as solid as a game plan as I normally do when I'm breaking down The Mandalorian. But we're gonna be able to, now that we're past the movie, I think we're gonna be able to move forward and do just fine. So get ready. Make sure your buckets are nearby, because we're gonna be cranking these episodes out at least once a week for the year. We're gonna try to get through season 1 as fast as we can. So maybe 2 a week. We'll see how time goes. With that being said, thank you all so much for listening. My name is Tom. This is MandoVision. Be sure to follow us on social media. We are at Mando_Vision on Twitter, Instagram. We are available to listen to as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, several others, including our host site, Transistor FM, and many other places. And if there's a platform we are not on yet, let me know, and I will make sure to get us on there as quick as I can, because I want to make sure you guys are listening to us where you want to listen to us. Don't be inconvenienced. I'll go where you want me to. It's totally fine. So, as we close out, thank you for listening. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.